Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Shaping the New York City Skyline podcast, episode 2. I am your host, Brenda Slakowski, and I'm here with my co-host,
David Shamshovich. And we're super excited to be back, Brenda.
I know, it's really exciting that we've made it to episode 2.
I mean, episode 1 is number 1 on our charts.
Our chart.
Because it's the only episode that we've posted so far. But I think this one is going to go through the roof, right?
I think so. We're getting some really nice feedback on episode 1, and Alvin had a lot to say for us, which was so informative.
He really, the guy has a ton of history behind him, and he really knows a ton about this industry.
Yeah.
And who did we speak to again this time?
And then this time we actually spoke to his partner and one of the other co-founders of Seiden and Shine, Jay Seiden.
The Jay Seiden. He has an interesting perspective on lots of things, and he has the experience to back it up.
Yeah, I think it was such a good get that we got him to come on the podcast. He's got a very busy schedule, and I was really happy that he made the time for us.
I think not only his schedule is busy, his office is really far from where we're recording.
Totally.
At our secret headquarters at Side and Shine, 570 Lexington Avenue.
You just gave away our secret headquarters.
I didn't tell them what floor we're on.
That's fair. Okay.
For those,
get past security.
You have to get past security. So I hope for those who are listening, you have the ability to run really fast around security.
Yeah, for sure. There's also a nice urban space downstairs where you can get a good pizza.
We'd love to join you for some beers as well, if you do come by. But seriously, if there are any questions about this podcast, I know we're interviewing Jay Seiden. First, we interviewed Alvin. I think those are 2 great episodes. You're about to hear Jay's interview. And we're not going to just stick with attorneys at our firm. Of course, we're biased, as you said, but we're going to get to some developers, architects, and others in the industry that I think are going to give us a different perspective on different aspects that perhaps Jay and Alvin haven't experienced because they're not sort of in the development area. They're in the real estate, professional, transactional area.
Right. I think it'll be really interesting to hear from different developers and architects as well. I want to hear the planning process that goes in before a client or developer even comes to us. I think that there's a lot of behind the scenes work that while we do a lot of the complicated procedural and let's go with the lawyer work, making it through these processes is very difficult. And by the time a developer even comes to us, they've got a whole plan in place and we just kind of help implement that plan. But it'd be interesting to hear how you come up with that plan and what factors into it.
And of course, we do implement the developer's plans, and whatever aspect we're retained to assist the developer on, we try to shift it towards the direction that we think will work from a legal perspective and, of course, from a financial perspective. But at the end of the day, the developer is the boss, and they're the ones that are putting up their money, their reputation to make sure that these buildings get built.
Yeah.
So Jay has been doing this for also 40, maybe 50 years at this point. And tax exemptions has been his forte.
Yeah. I'm thinking whether or not the legislature and the city council have even consulted different developers in what they actually need in order to build this affordable housing in New York City. It's interesting to kind of see council people and people in the legislature just do things. And I'm curious to know who they're consulting and who's saying you don't need 421A because you do need 421A.
You definitely do. And from Jay's interview, you're going to understand historically why that is. And these tax exemption programs have been around since the 50s. And I think in the 70s, as Jay will discuss a little bit more, New York was in a significant financial crisis and New York City was not as safe as it is today. I guess that's changed a little bit since COVID, but not nearly as much as it was in the 70s. And developers were not developing, similar to sort of what's happening now with the fact that the 421A program expired. Yeah. So the tax exemption was instrumental, as Jay will talk about in more detail, in the development of property. Now we're having another crisis. The governor wanted to develop about 800,000 homes, and she essentially abandoned it because she knew she wasn't getting anywhere, and she needed to turn to other items like bail reform and other things that were on her list of agendas, and housing sort of was left out in the cold.
Yeah. History will always repeat itself. And it's a good perspective to look back and see how we handled it previously in order to figure out how to move forward now. I know that Jay is going to talk about a little bit the 421G program and how the conversions came into play in the late 90s to help revitalize the financial district downtown. And it really worked. It created a lot of homes. And hopefully, moving forward, the legislature will kind of look back and say, what worked in the past and how can we use that to make it work for the future?
I fully agree. I'm not sure how quickly they're going to come to that realization. It's not going to probably happen this year.
Sadly.
Sadly, as we talked about. And the program is, permits are down for new construction. Clients are planning for a potentially new 421A program, which we all believe will be in place.
And vital.
It's vital because development is at a standstill at this point and will continue to be. But I don't think the planning is going to stop, and developers are going to continue doing what they do, although probably at a lower rate. I think a lower volume ahead of us until something comes back. And from what I understand, essentially, there's no real new developments that have been residential developments that have come to the city without some sort of tax exemption program, given how high real estate taxes are. And so it's just simply impossible from an economic perspective. And I think the big fight is not just the giveaway that legislators think that program is for developers. It's providing a higher level of affordability. But as we said time and time again, as Jay will discuss and you will hear, it's just necessary. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. The governor came up with another program that was to replace the 421A, which was rejected. And there's got to be some sort of compromise at the end of the day for it to happen.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing his take on it, and maybe he has some sort of proposal for it, like how to fix it all.
I think Jay's going to be able to fix the world. So Jay, what do you think was the most interesting thing that Jay talked about during his interview? I mean, I think we really grilled him.
Yeah.
At some point, you waterboarded him to explain. Isn't that just a euphemism for ask a question?
I don't think so.
Oh.
At all.
I'm sorry. I guess I don't really know what waterboarding is. But you asked him lots of poignant questions, as did I. I think he was taken a little back. I don't think anybody's ever questioned him
as thoroughly as we did.
I don't think anybody knows the programs well enough, frankly, to question him.
Yeah. I like to think that our questions kind of pushed his point of view for a little bit, or made him think about the history of it all and the way things used to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think he started out saying, well, there's not much to talk about. And then guess what? There was a ton to talk about, but we made sure to call it down to just the basic essentials. So don't worry, podcasters, listeners.
I think we're the podcaster.
We're the podcaster, the podcastees.
Right.
That's a legal term.
I like that.
Yeah.
Ask-me.
Yeah. Call us if you need to understand any sort of terms. We're really excited to hear this episode because Jay really is, all jokes aside, he's like the George Washington. I'm going to keep on coming up with.
I know. He's like the different founding fathers. You want to bring Abraham in there?
He's the Abraham, like Abraham from the Bible or Abraham Lincoln?
Oh, I was going from the Bible.
Oh, Bible. He's like the Abraham of, I would say Adam. Adam was number one.
That's fair.
Okay, so he's like the Adam of 421A. I don't want to say.
I think Jason is the Eve.
Jason Hershkowitz is a partner here at Seiden Shine who does practices and tax incentives. He's an amazing attorney. And yeah, I guess here in this context, he would be, or Adam's son. What was Adam's son's name? Was that
Cain and Abel, right?
Cain and Abel?
Yeah.
Cain.
Look at me. I got all my Bible knowledge.
Well, which one would he be? Which one was the one that murdered the other?
Did Cain murder Abel or Abel no, Cain murdered Abel, for sure.
So it's Cain.
He could be Cain.
Yeah, he has to be because Abel's
dead.
He's not.
Well, also, Cain gets things done, okay? He's really effective in execution.
You could
pun intended.
Object.
Pun intended.
I think we've talked enough about Jay, and I think let's listen to what he has to say. Everybody, here's Jay Seiden.
Today's guest is none other than Jay Seiden. He's got an incredible history in the New York City real estate industry. He's one of the founding members of Seiden Shine, and we're very excited to have him here today.
The Seiden in Seiden Shine is here, and he's going to tell us about his career, how he got to where he's at, how he started, his humble beginnings, and his rise to fame. So welcome,
Jay.
Yeah.
It really is a humbling test, okay? Because I about and grew up in Brooklyn, but I did, okay? Went to high school and college and law school in Brooklyn. And coming from a middle-class background, and then getting out of law school, graduating in 1967. And by 1969 and 1970, I started my career of just pure real estate. And actually, at the very beginning, I was with a firm by the name of Abrams, Kisselhoff and Kissen back in 1971, and I was a junior partner. And thrust onto my desk were all of the J51 applications that no one in the firm wanted to handle. So good for me was that by 1976, I was one of the few attorneys in New York City that knew anything about J51 and then the emerging 421A legislation.
So do you want to give everybody a little bit of a background on what your role in effectuating these J51 plans were and what J51 was and is now?
And of course, how did you learn? Because they just threw these files on your desk. How did you figure this stuff out?
Well, I think most of us learn by doing it.
Right.
Okay, because in New York City, everything is so dramatic that you would like to think that there was someone that would be your tutor.
Experience is the best education.
All of these J51 files on my desk. At that time, J51 was really evolved back in the 50s as a program to deal with major capital improvement items, changing plumbing, changing boilers. It was expanded by the time I got into it in 1969-70 into a program that helped to renovate the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where you had a lot of rooming houses and you had a lot of developers who were doing their first or second or third projects that really immigrated to the United States. And they were builders, and the projects were enormous, and sometimes just brownstone, sometimes tenement buildings, sometimes abandoned hotels. And J51 really was very vital in renovating the Upper West Side.
So in exchange for renovating this property, you were given a tax abatement of some sort?
Well, J51 program was an exemption and an abatement program. Okay. And the exemption was any increase in assessments to the property resulting from the development. And the abatement was an abatement against the original tax due on the project at the start. And that kind of evolved, and that became a very significant program in New York. And I like to think of what my involvement and my firm's involvement historically is. We were really at the forefront of all of these new emerging areas. In the initial stages, it was the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Then it evolved into Tribeca and Soho. And J51 was the key program that was used to renovate these buildings. And everyone, the question and the political issues that came up even back then were, well, why do you need it? And wouldn't you have done it anyway? And that's been kind of the dissonant voice of those who think that everyone in real estate just makes a lot of money. And that wasn't the case. And in fact, the tax policy in New York was largely responsible for why you needed these programs. What I mean by that, the assessment of real estate in New York, increases in assessment come about in two ways. They come about as a result of physical work done on the project. And then second, if there's an increase in rents, okay, then on an economic analysis basis, they increase those assessments accordingly. Well, when you're taking an abandoned SRO building or an abandoned hotel, okay, by the time you do that renovation work, okay, it's going to take you a couple of years, and then you're going to have to rent it out and develop a rent roll. Well, the city's policy was, as you were building the building, okay, they would come up with a physical assessment increase. They weren't. So the January 5th, following the beginning of my construction project, the city come up with an additional increase, and I'm not even a third or halfway through.
Wow.
And so the impediment of the tax policy in the city had a large influence on why you needed an abatement and exemption program.
And what exactly did the city get in return for that exemption? Was it just the fact that these things were constructed in a normal way? They were reconstructing these things. Did they get some level of affordability back?
And well, in the beginning stages, the answer to that is no. Okay, there was no affordability requirement under J51 or in the early stages of 421 even. However, were these projects not done under the tax programs, you would have had free market rents. And the give back under these programs was that you had to create rent stabilized or rent regulated rents for the period of time that the benefits were in place. So that was kind of the trade-off. Instead of just having luxury units, which you would have had to have had if you were going to spend that much money. But the fact is you couldn't, if you could reach those rents anyway. But the city at least knew that for under J51, they could have had rent regulation for up to 18 years. And 421, depending upon what stage you did the project on, they created, again, rent stabilization. Well, later on in the 421A age, they created a certain percentage of units that had to meet certain affordability standards.
You talked historically a little bit about J51, how it sort of started on the Upper West Side. and then it moved to Tribeca and other areas. Is there a reason for that? Is it because those areas were more dilapidated, they were deteriorating?
Good question. In fact, I did probably every building in Soho that was done under J51. And the reason they did it was you had a lot of illegal living conditions. So a good friend of mine, famous architect, Shale Shapiro, was the architect in a lot of these buildings. And the city wanted them to be legalized. Well, again, you needed an incentive. If you're going to spend that much money to legalize the building, why do it if you're going to get hit with high taxes right away? So I always viewed these tax programs as sort of like a deferred loan, that the city would allow you a certain period of time to pay on the original assessment while you're developing and spending a lot of money, hiring a lot of contractors, and creating this flow of activity. So all of Soho was renovated under J51.
So it creates multiple benefits. One, it beautifies the city. So it gives incentives to builders to build, which would probably decrease crime. And then it provides some rent stabilized units. That's good for New Yorkers.
Right.
Win-win.
Historically, we started out on the Upper West Side. My practice, ultimately Alvin and I together, it then spread to Soho and Tribeca, into Carroll Gardens in Brooklyn, Park Slope, hotels that were renovated, that were downtrodden. Okay. Then we came up to Harlem. All of Harlem was renovated. Now, not under J51, because when the Giuliani administration was in, they created what's called cornerstone projects. And the cornerstone projects really allowed developers to get in at a very reasonable price, pay the tax on the original assessment of the project, and build what Harlem is magnificent now. And these then were all done at a different time where there was a percentage of affordability. So the trade-off there was, we're going to allow you to take dilapidated buildings, tear them down, pay us on the same original assessment, and increases would be exempted, depending upon what percentage of affordability there was for various periods of time. So then we go from Harlem, and then all of a sudden Brooklyn is welcoming us. When I say us, the development group, because before 1985, I don't think there was any new building built below 14th Street in Manhattan.
Wow.
So now Williamsburg and Bushwick and Bed-Stuy, are being developed under 421A. And there was always a requirement of affordability.
When did 421A come into, and how did it come into existence?
Well, in 1976, I'm in my office side, 400 Madison Avenue. This is pre-Alvin. Alvin was in another firm, and then I was a startup, a Seiden firm, And 421A used to be a renovation and new construction program. J51 was an abatement and exemption. So I had a few clients that came in, and once J51 allowed conversions of non-residential buildings, developers who started under 421A wanted to give up 421A because of the abatement component. And I had meetings in my office where guys, we switch out of 421A and go to J51. And a few did. I think part of it was in Manhattan, the legislature said, these are giveaways.
Classic.
And similar arguments that they make now, right?
They remodeled J51 so that post-construction assessment of the project was in excess of $38,000 per dwelling unit. It was not eligible. Well, that put the kibosh on Manhattan J51.
Right.
And in fact, they wanted to expand that same restriction throughout the city, but we were able politically to get them to leave the boroughs alone. So 421A became the only program to do new construction.
So it's essentially a successor about J51.
Well, yeah, because J51 was a conversion. 421 then became not just conversions, but new construction. And ultimately, conversions weren't eligible on the board.
Were there any programs, either abatements or exemptions, available for new construction before 421A?
Not to my knowledge.
I mean, you are one of the founding fathers, essentially, of tax incentives in New York City, so I think you would know.
Now, the organization, the New York State Association for Affordable Housing,
Nice SAFA for the rest of everybody,
was founded in this firm. When Alvin and I got together in 1995, within a year, NYSAPA was organized in our office here, and I was on the original executive committee of NYSAPA for many, many years. That became, again, a program where a lot of those projects, affordable projects, for market rate developers, not just affordable developers, was founded. And one of the keys there was 421. unless there was pure 100% affordability. And then 420C came into play. With 420C required some kind of tax-exempt bond financing or HCI tax credit. So the 421A did not have that requirement. So 421A was the tool to allow all of the affordable housing development to take place.
And you mentioned earlier that NYSAFA was founded here, but obviously you came together with Alvin as well. So I want to understand how that synergy came about, why you decided to partner with Alvin, and then how the two of you then created NYSAFA, and what was the reason? Usually necessity is the mother of invention. I assume that had something to do with it.
When Alvin and I got together, my experience in the tax programs, his experience in general real estate development and in condominiums, it kind of created a great synergy. NYSAFA was created to promote affordable housing for market rate developers, not just for low income. And it was kind of a natural fit for us because it started to involve low income housing tax credits and ultimately 421A certificates and then ultimately inclusionary rights, sale of those. And Alvin had a lot of experience in those areas. We developed that experience. So it's a very good synergy. So I think, again, just going back, I think following some NYSAFA ourselves, the 421A, 420C, no longer J51, came the key triggers to development. And I think the question is, why would these have been done without 421A or without J51, without any of these programs, which has kind of become the screaming, background policy for politics in New York? And I don't think so, because what you have here is the tax policy of the city, where day one, every January 5th, they take how much money is spent on construction. They assess projects at 65% of market value. And all of a sudden you have $1 million in construction that goes into a project. As of that January, they're going to tax you at that point in time, and you have no ability to abate it, and you're early on in construction.
Do you think there's a way for the city to change the way they assess properties or how they charge tax that could potentially serve as another sort of replacement for the program?
I think that the real estate board and a lot of its high-level executives have been trying to do that for many years, but no one's been able to figure out, because in that, you then have the Class 1 homeowners, one-story building. What do you do with them? They've kind of enjoyed a certain privilege of tax policy for many. And I know some of the big developers have tried to go that route, and it's one of the things saying, the mayor would say, we got to change tax policy, but they haven't been able to even come close. So every January 5th, they reassess property in New York. Other jurisdictions don't do that. And part of that is how much value is put into a project in construction.
So the original 421A that came about after that J51, that lasted until 2015. How is that different from the one that just expired now in 2022?
Different affordability.
Okay.
And what were the criticisms of that old program? What were people saying about it at the time during it?
Well, I think it's the same criticism that the city is giving away, all of this tax revenue, that it would have been there anyway. And I kind of started a little study of my own, which essentially covers two things. Number one is we had so many 421As that we've done in Seiden and China. We kind of created a little log of what were the assessments before the project started and what's the assessment of the projects and the taxes being generated after the benefits under the program expired. And it's amazing.
Can you give us a ballpark of that number?
A sampling of about 20 projects, and the increase in assessed value of those 20 projects is $653 million.
Wow. And
that's just a sample, because we've done many, many more. Some other firms that have done a lot. And that's just 421.
Yeah.
So, that $650 million, you're dealing with like an enormous tax increase and a 12% tax rate. During that whole period of time, taxes were always paid on the original assessment of the project before the program, before the construction started. So in that particular situation, those projects, you had an aggregate assessment before it, $13 million, and after $650.
Wow. That's a big difference.
Oh, it's a huge, and that's just a sampling project.
Yeah.
Now, there's also a hidden thing in this, and I don't know why it's hidden. The ability of New York City to borrow money, borrowing capacity, is based upon the assessed value of real estate. No one talks about that. Now, there's been since 1980 a geometric increase of the assessed value of real estate, residential, and it's based on market value of real estate. not the taxable value of real estate after the exemption. Now, that provides schools, it provides all kinds of benefit programs. So it's quite about that. It's the loud voice in New York politics. It is the, Democratic Party, the progressive part of the party, which says these are giveaways, and they're not.
But are they giveaways? Like you said, if the building hadn't been built, they wouldn't have the revenue in the first place.
That's right.
So it's sort of chicken and egg, right? What was the political climate back when the new 421A program came about, the one that I guess just recently expired?
The political climate in New York City, since I've been in practice of law, has always had a very significant Democratic influence, let's say the negative side. And what changed politically in New York was that the New York State legislature, where 421A comes from, it's not enacted by the city. It's a state statute. You had a split up in Albany. The Senate was controlled by the Republican, and the Assembly was controlled by the Democrats. And you know what? Truth be told, we can't get a bill through now to extend this.
But why were they at that time not arguing the same thing they're arguing now? They were, but yet it still passed. They still passed another 421A program.
Because you had different political reform. Again, I lived early on. There was a woman by the name of Councilwoman Ruth Messenger, who was as liberal a Democrat as there ever was. These influences existed from the day I started through today. My first job in the law firm business was with a firm, Gap and Weiss. Teddy Weiss was a liberal Democrat from the Upper West Side, but he was a pragmatic. I think he understood that it's a marriage. It's not about two counter interests. The interest is, how do we make New York better? And I think that's kind of gotten lost locally, and I think it's gotten lost nationally. What's good for the city? What's good for the country? And no one seems to be able to talk anymore.
Well, the new program, obviously, there is no new program. They didn't extend the completion deadline. They didn't create a new program. I'm sort of trying to understand, why is it that they were able to come to terms 8 years ago, but they are not able to do so now? What's the difference?
Well, I don't know that there is. I think when the other one expired in 2015, it was renewed for a period of time. And the construction unions got involved, Governor Cuomo, the real estate board. And what happened was permits were way down. There was no new construction.
We're seeing that now as well.
We're seeing that now, but you have also what's happened is you have these mandatory inclusionary housing zones. So the city, on one hand, was very aggressive in creating these new zones, but we have a lot of projects here that can't comply with that if there's no 421.
Financially, yeah.
When we spoke with Alvin, one of the big things that he mentioned was that MIH was passed specifically so that it would correspond with 421A. You couldn't possibly do the together, just simply wouldn't underwrite.
But I think that goes before MIH. I think when you got to 20, 30% affordability, obligation to pay full taxes, that would have been very tough to underwrite. And yet MIH is just another, that was specifically contemplated, including the formulas for 421A. But you speak to clients, no one who was going to do 25% or 30% affordability would have built a project without 421A. And the banks wouldn't be too big a gap. If you think that construction costs were going to run $300 a union job, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, non-union, that's an enormous number to build a 500-unit building with full taxes coming in without no benefit. It's typically the development process in New York. It takes a few years to catch up to the value of the land, the enormous construction costs. The old 421A at least had built into it. It was an administrative provision, 11-209 of the New York City Administrative Code, which allowed you for a period of a couple of years, if you filed a 421A application, to get a project assessment removed, meaning if there was a physical assessment put on for those couple of years, you could remove it if you filed for 421A. Problem came about under the new 421A, you couldn't file a 421A application until completion of the project. So during the development of the project, you had this obligation to pay these increases in assessment. And you could only abate that at the back end of the project, so that they eliminated that project assessment relief. Because at that time you would file a 421A for permanent benefits anyway. You could then reach back for the overages that you paid during the construction period, but you had to fund it, construction.
Still means the developer needs that cash on hand to be able to upfront that cost.
And we would help assist some developers achieve that money from the Department of Finance.
That's great. So at the end of the project, there's a 3-year reach back, and you file your 421A application, which, by the way, could take a year to process. And if it's an inclusionary project, as you two know, okay, because we work on it together, there's a delay getting Department of Housing Preservation and Development to sign off on the inclusionary completion requirements. And then the 421A application really sits there. We can't sometimes even file it till we get all the CFO for all of the residential units. So on the back end, it may take another full year to get the certificate of eligibility and have a reach back.
Have you seen any complications in having to file the applications post-construction as opposed to the prior program where you really got a preliminary certificate and that was sort of like decision that said, you're good to go, but now you have to wait till after construction?
We're pretty good with the processing. The one benefit of the new program was there were less requirements regarding site eligibility, so that the old 421A had a concept of underutilization of the real estate. And that was part of your preliminary application and your final application. Today, it's kind of an as-of-right program that, irrespective of what was on the site before, you would be eligible for 421A.
What were the requirements in the event if there was something on the property previously? You're going to say this better than I can.
Used to have under there are 5-to-1 requirements. You had existing apartments on the site of 100 apartments, create 500. Now, they were so anxious to have the 421A that how they decided what was on the site before was back and forth, and it was construed liberally to the developer's benefit, so that they didn't look back 3 years. It was the apartments in effect at the time you started construction. When you start construction, or no, you.
Depends on your definition of construction.
There have been times where there's an understanding that these were incentive programs, that people wanted you to build housing. And I remember my office was on 6th Avenue and 55th Street when I was with this paper, it was Kisselop and Kissen. And you go out on 6th Avenue and 55th, it was beautiful. And if you walk 2 blocks west, it was horrible. So that changed so dramatically. So I think, this whole city has evolved into a beautiful city with development. And I think we got to make sure that it continues that way, because you have an increase in population. If you're not building housing, how are you going to accommodate that?
What have the clients, the developer clients who've not made the 421A deadline and now either are stuck with a development site that they don't think can get 421A, or potentially a new program could apply? What sorts of things what questions are they asking you?
Can we work up in Scarsdale, or can we do work in Newark?
I might have to take the New Jersey.
I mean, if you just take a look at new permits since June, they're on, okay, and the permits that took place in June with an eye towards vesting under 421A. The problem is that a lot of those projects can't get financing. Interest rates are up there. They were not all done by the most experienced developers. And now they got this 2026 deadline, which is banks can say, wait a sec, it's now June of 2023. We're not so sure you apply and get the project done. There is an ability to have a partially eligible project before 12. So then if I was going to do 500 units, I could have a building that had 250 units that are completed by June of 2026, create a condominium unit, have those apply for 421A. But what good is that? The rest of the buildings.
Giving away some trade secrets here, Jay.
No lawyers listen to me.
Who knows?
I hope there are. The other interesting thing about the new program, which is different from the prior program, is that the prior program applied to condominiums, to residential condos.
Not 2015. The 2015 program cut back. No longer could you get 421A.
Why is that? Why did they make that decision?
A wrong decision again. Okay, I think it was the wrong part of the Democratic Party that thinks it's a giveaway, that you can have people that are getting big benefits and they're paying $1 million a apartment. They don't want affluent people getting 421. But the fact is that we did a lot of Williamsburg projects. Some very important developers that were getting 421A what condominiums, and it brought into the city. People wanted to stay here, have their kids go to school here. Okay. And when they decided not to, now there was one carve out. You have a building with 35 units or less, get 421A within the condominium structure. But that only works if the assessment of those projects after completion is like $65,000 per apartment. And you don't know until after the fact whether it's going to meet that test. And I think we may have 1 or 2 buildings that meet that.
Have we processed those applications for the buildings? And how did that follow up?
But the problem is that along the way, we didn't know whether they would meet the test. So there's a special risk factor that had to be written into the offering plans that you're only going to get 421A if the average assessment per unit for the 35 units is under 65,000. And so if you don't know what the benefit is going in, the marketability of those units is difficult. And we have one project now where we're dealing with Tax-tastic counsel, where they're right on the edge of that 65,000 average. And he's got to go make an argument at the city to get those numbers down below.
Where are those condos located? I assume they're not in Manhattan,
No,
right?
not
They're in the outer boroughs. You would most likely not have a Manhattan condo.
It was the same thing they did to J51, where you couldn't qualify for the exemption if post-construction assessment was $38,000 per dwelling unit. But which brings up, I'm glad you raised that, Dave, because there's another whole problem now, which is you have these inefficient office buildings and hotels that are closing. Okay, and we've made kind of our own study back in the 90s. Office buildings that were no longer viable there were developed and created and renovated into residential buildings under a program called 421G, which we did a lot of. And that kind of created a whole residential environment in Lower Manhattan. Well, we wrote an article probably about 8 months ago, which is, okay, with hotels staggering in the city, and now all of the office buildings, not all, but a lot of office buildings in financial trouble, with the need for housing, can we create a program to convert those buildings and those hotels into residential housing? And the point is you need a program. You need a tax program. Again, the cost of renovating those buildings is enormous. And if you can get hit right away with taxes on that increase in market value, how do you do that? And there's been a lot of news about the legislature looking for a program to handle that. And our response to that was, look, you can go back under 421A was originally a conversion statute. So you could do it under a revised 421A, which could be simply putting a new paragraph into the 421A statute saying it's eligible conversions of non-residential buildings qualify for 421A, provided they provide X percentage of affordable housing. You could create or reenact 421G, which was the program that all of the Lower Manhattan buildings were done on, and that could be revised. And that was, again, a state bill, which wouldn't require city approval, city council. And lastly, which no one wants to really think about is, well, let's go back to a new J51, which would provide a renovation benefit, no cap on assessment after development, because we'd never make it. And let's see what happens with that. I think the city's going to have to do something because you have a lot of, after COVID, a lot of office buildings and hotels that are now being underutilized. You know, I know the last conversation in Albany is that the governor has taken out all housing references in the budget.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it belongs in the budget. In other words, I don't know why the 421A or J51 are in. They never used to be part of the budget.
So where do they come about instead?
They'll be having an enactment. All of a sudden, the legislature gets together in the end of April, May, June, blowing up. And the construction unions say, guys, okay, we're not going to have any work. So what are we doing here? And everyone says these MYH buildings aren't getting built. What are we going to do about that? And all of a sudden, maybe the voice changes.
Last time that happened, it took about a year of effect.
It was the last time. But before that, there were always deadlines. So it never was resolved in February, March. It happens because what's going to happen to those projects that can't get completed? Before anything else, I think there's going to be an extension of time to complete.
Hopefully.
Well, that's my prediction. I always tell clients, call me all the time, and we have a little fortune teller machine in the lobby, and we bill them a quarter, but it's going up. A quarter with inflation has different.
One of those old 8-ball rings today, right?
So I go out and I say, hold on a second. They say, billing me this? I said, no. Go out and I tell them, I said, we don't know yet.
Yeah. Is there any indication to you? Do you have any sort of inside, maybe not inside information, but perhaps something, you've been doing this for a long time. I think the history really repeats itself.
So I agree with you. And I think the history is they need these programs.
But there's the legislature.
I think, well, the legislature has to answer to their constituents and the other unions that are involved in this. 421A does have built into it, didn't used to, a requirement to have prevailing wage on construction, certain projects. Well, if there is no one working, okay, what's going to happen? I think the pressure will build. I think you need to have those and it's, by the way, the MIH, the community boards, and the city council representatives in that district, okay, are going to start saying, guys, we did this whole rezoning, okay, we can't build unless you extend the statute. So the reality is that since 1969, okay, this has been the mainstay of my legal processes. So I believe that ultimately it'll come about.
Do you want to go back and talk a little bit more about ICAP and how that works with 421A?
Well, the thing that's good about New York, at least from a legal perspective, is we have such an active condominium group in our firm that we have the ability to slice and dice. I've had projects over the years where years ago we got 421A, J51, and ICAP. We had 3 separate units: new construction, residential, renovated residential with J51, and ICAP with the commercial project. And we created separate condominium units for that. You could still do that, okay, as we were saying before, 20C and ICAP, 421A and ICAP, Article 11s, and you can still create. Now, the ICAP program applies, again, different parts of the city have different benefit programs. New construction projects are not eligible in Manhattan below 59th Street. They are eligible in Harlem and all of the boroughs.
One of the things that Alvin spoke out about, and I happen to agree with him, is one of the mistakes in the newer 420. It's like the Old Testament and the New Testament. They're both old. But the one that just expired is the 130% AMI option, which isn't exactly an option because I think the legislature has it wrong because you can't exactly get the 130% AMI rents in certain areas, and they don't apply in other higher-end areas.
And if you're doing inclusionary, you can't get the one.
Yeah, precisely.
So you have certain things that take it down, and the ability to get 130 in certain low-income areas. A lot of our projects, the developers aren't going for the 130. They're putting in their workbooks at 110, 120.
Why is that? Why are they?
Because they can't change the workbook, and they have to go to market. And the market, they don't think going in is 130.
And they have significant repercussions if they're not able to lease them up in the initial lottery, because then they're stuck with homeless referrals, which is obviously a good cause. But at the same time, I've heard lots of horror stories about those referrals, and then you're stuck with someone who you can't qualify. You can't.
They qualify.
Good code of extension.
It depends what happens.
Right.
Unlikely considering the city is paying their rent.
I mean, I guess on some fronts it's good because then the city's paying their rents and you can get up to 130% AMI. But, practically speaking, even though you can go up to 130%, given in mandatory inclusionary and inclusionary, you can't get there.
Very few projects are done where they reach the 30 and 1.
I very rarely heard anyone argue that back, mostly because I think there's a lot of people that don't understand it. And so they're yelling about these 130%, but it doesn't actually happen.
Well, one of the things that, again, I think 421A program that's in existence provides for a 35-year tax. I think that's terrible. I think that we've lived in Manhattan with original 10-year exemption periods with actually only 5 or 6 years and then a sliding scale. A lot of the Williamsburg projects were 25 years. Some of the other projects in Queens or Brooklyn were 15-year benefits. I think they could take a look at that. I don't think we need to have a 35-year 100% exemption.
There's a good point that you bring up. I would ask you 2 questions about it. I'll ask them one at a time. The first is, why did they choose, if you know, or why do you think they chose the years that they chose as compared to the prior program?
I think that it was a negotiation. I think the real estate, the community did a good job of saying if we're going to do 25, 30% affordability, we want a 50-year exemption. And they settled it.
That makes sense. I thought perhaps it was tied to something that I didn't realize. And under the prior program, it actually sort of burned out slowly so you can get used to it, right? The last 5 years, would go, you'd be
Well, you had 21 years, 100%, and then
phasing in, which is phasing into the 100%.
and even that's long-term benefit.
Yeah.
And I don't know that the development community needs that longer benefit to make a project viable. Because no one really knows what, and even the financing community and money, I don't know if they ever look at years 20 through 35 and factor in how much additional value they've gone by then.
Yeah. It's usually a 10-year mortgage. So that's why I thought it interesting that they had 25, 30, 35 years, because you're right, they're not going to look at the projections at that late stage. I thought the whole purpose of the exemption was to give the developers that benefit while they're paying their mortgage, so that this way they're not getting sort of double hit.
But all I'm saying is I think that 35 years is a long time. And if any of our clients are listening to this, I'm only half serious.
Even after this conversation, you've just created the new proposal for the next 421A. Shorter benefit period, lower AMI levels. Let's do 110% at a 20-year abatement. There you go, legislature. We just solved your problem.
Let's get a program. That's what we need. Something that, look, back when all of Manhattan was done, it was a 10-year program. And then it was extended with certain areas in Harlem. There were special areas. Projects got done, major projects. And there was a rent stabilization requirement. I think that maybe things have gotten a little out of whack, and maybe part of the dialogue should be, let's have a shorter exemption period. To be honest with you, I don't know that that would be acceptable to those who don't want 421A. But what I think is more important is the politics have to change. And the politics have to change so that what's the good for the city? What's going to get jobs created? What's going to provide housing? And let's create some kind of, what I said before, a deferral or a loan to the development community to get these things done.
Yes. So I think that's an interesting perspective, what Jay just said, because that shows exactly what you're talking about, which is if the exemption is not there, the cost of construction is up, the cost of labor is up, inflation is insane,
High real estate.
high interest rates, all these things create a big problem to develop. If it was happening with condos, it's going to happen with rentals, and then there's not going to be any affordable housing. You're just going to see developers doing high class or luxury market buildings.
And if you can rent, if your rents are $100 a foot, that's only at a certain level. Right? So if you can't create a project that provides for that 20, 30% affordable unit market, then what you're going to have is, and then the incentive is, hey, listen, why should I bother? Okay, I'm not going to be on, if I build a luxury building, rental building, I'm not under rent control. Well, can you do it? Can you get those rents? Okay, so that's but you're not going to do it and build it so that you're providing for the middle income. The construction cost is too high. The taxes are too high. The land acquisition cost is too high. It's all going to be luxury. So that's where you're pushing it, but that's a tough sell. So what are you providing in the city? And maybe they should have looked at it a little different. Maybe the answer is let's have a project where we'll give them 15 years benefit, but we want to sell 30% at 180% of that one. Let's try to create housing for the middle income, not just the low income.
This is something I brought up last time as well, that really the focus is on low income, but that takes out the equation others who do need that sort of housing.
Why not do that? Why not create something which allows you to market to that, and you want that middle income?
Is there anything that you think the city itself can do? I know that we can't pass statutes. City can't pass statutes, or I'm the city. The city can't pass they can't pass statutes that apply to the entire state. But is there an exemption program that the city can do as of right? I know there are non-as of right programs.
Well, logical level.
Yeah.
Which is not as right.
Like, yes. Are there other measures?
420A is really administered now. It's a state statute, but the city really is enforced.
But can the city come up with their own?
Most of it has to come through the state. They need an enabling. Even J51 was enabled by the state, which was 11243. Okay, the administrative code still called J51, but the state statute was 489 of the real property tax law. And that said, hey, city, you can come up with a program. So the city can't create, I believe, its own tax program.
We cannot create.
I think they can do a pilot, but even the pilots, I think, come out of IDA.
And those aren't as of right. Those are discretionary. Could there be some sort of program where they agree not to assess above a certain amount, and that would effectively create an exemption.
No, what comes out of state.
I wanted to ask one final question, which is the $1,000,000 question. Will there be a new program? I know the answer is yes, but the second part of the question is, when do you think there'll be a new? What's your prediction? Should we go to the fortune teller machine and ask?
Yeah, I think we should.
You can charge David double $1.
$2.
You know, Dave, I really can't. You know, because the politics is so crazy. But the need is there.
That's a good answer.
Okay.
Is there any note you want to chat? I think you were so amazing. Jay, really, I mean, the level of information, and I personally think, I think Brenda agrees with me, that history is extremely important, and getting your knowledge and having Alvin's knowledge and the history, something I agree with the legislature doesn't have, is important. That perspective. Where were we back then, and the mindset and how we got through it? We're going through it again. And it's going to happen again like 10, 15 years from now.
You know, I take a lot of pride out of the history and being engaged. You know, building a 90-story office building, to me, isn't sexy. Taking a building in Soho, trying to make it legal, and meeting all of those people, or working up at Harlem and doing, or Williamsburg, where these are new concepts. It's not just for IBM. It's been really very, very important to me. And I know I'll probably spend, a lot of future years at least trying to maintain history and that knowledge. So that's, I'm glad you guys are doing this. I think it's great.
Definitely. And thank you for sharing that knowledge with us. We really enjoyed hearing
I'll tell you the truth.
it.
We love hearing how you shape the New York skyline. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Jay.
We appreciate it.
Well, everyone, that was Jay Seiden. I think he gave us some great information, David. What do you think?
He was very articulate, and you can clearly tell he knows what he's talking about as the George Washington of tax incentives.
Yeah, definitely.
What do we talk about? ICAP? Who knew what a J51 was? I mean, other than us.
Right, other than us. I'll tell you, I only knew the bare minimum of J51, so this was very informative for me.
Well, J51, it's funny. J51 slowly but surely went away quietly in 2022.
J51 was quiet quitting.
It was definitely quiet quitting during we're not quiet quitting. We're being very loud about it.
Oh, totally.
It went away, and it was really a good program for, property that needed to be revamped, that needed to be reconstructed, that was dilapidated. So I'm surprised nobody really made much of a noise, but I guess new development is really all the rage.
Yeah.
Is new better? Is that?
Well, it used to be when 421A was around. I mean, clearly from what Jay said, 421A is essential to new construction.
Yeah. Now all we have is the ghost of 421A. It's like Patrick Swayze. There's not really much for us to recap from Jay. I think he really sunk it. He sunk it in, and he explained his experience and sort of what he brings to the table. I'm excited to continue this podcast. I know this is only episode 2. We have 2 of the founding fathers of Seiden and Shine. And in future episodes, episode 3, we're not going to tell you who our guest is, not because we don't know who it is, and we don't, but because
I wasn't going to tell people that.
We're going to edit. I'm just trying to create a mood for us.
Right.
The laughy mood.
We don't need the mood. We bring the mood.
We're bringing the mood.
Yeah. It's called bringing the vibes.
The good vibes.
Good vibes,
yeah.
Always.
That's why we have a sign above Brenda's office that says believe.
Believe. Yeah. I'm a huge Ted Lasso fan, everybody.
We all are.
Yeah.
We all play soccer.
Mandated watching for The Office.
Ted Lasso. I'm glad you at least knew the Ted Lasso reference.
Well, of course. Are you kidding? It's one of my go-to shows.
Too bad they didn't make Ghost into a show.
And that I haven't seen. You're right.
See Ghost. So next, we're going to be presenting lots of interesting people, including we have architects and some developers lined up.
Yeah.
And
I think episode 3 is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're going to have a completely different perspective. I'm excited to actually just hear it because, yes, we do this all the time, but we don't get to sit down and talk to the various parties, the various people that make up the development team to understand their perspective because we're trying to get a job done and multiple jobs done.
Yeah. I think the developer side is going to be very eye-opening, and I'm excited to hear that, to have that mind-expanding conversation.
I think each developer has their own unique experience as to how they came to doing it, but developers, it's a very risky business.
Yeah.
And it depends a lot on market conditions. I guess our industry does as well. But for development, it's there's a lot of pain out there. I assume architects similarly, but they can pivot.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious about motivations. Yeah, it's a good question. Why does somebody get into development in the first place?
You would be just so surprised at how many stories we've heard from developers and how much we've experienced based on the projects they've worked on, where they think that they're going to go one way and they go a completely different other way. whether it's because the lender throws a curveball, the government does, or another party that they're trying to enter into an agreement with.
Right. Yeah.
I'm interested in hearing about all that stuff.
Yeah. We'll see who we end up bringing on for the next few episodes, but I want to hear various perspectives of different developers. I want to hear from architects. I want to hear from landlord tenant councils. I want to hear from anyone and everyone out there to see what makes up the entire picture of the New York City real estate industry,
And how they contribute to shaping the New York City skyline.
Yeah.
I love it when they mention the name of the podcast in the podcast.
I think it's intentional.
I know. I just did.
Fair. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out at info@seidenshine.com or visit our website, seidenshine.com. Enjoy your listening, guys.
Yep. Godspeed.
Keep cool.